Alright, hi you guys. Today we're going to look at Assignment 2. And I have already downloaded the zip file for Assignment 2 off of the Canvas page for week 2, and the zip file is right there. And I moved it to the folder where I would be keeping my homework for this course. And we need to extract that one. So I'm going to go into it and hit the Extract All button like we did last time and hit Extract. And open it up a new folder. And if I go back just to take a look, now you'll see in my folder where I put that I have my zip file and the new folder which was extracted. We can ignore that one for now. We can go into week 2. And there is a week 2 R project file. And hopefully if things work right, we can click on that. And in Windows, it's associated that type of file with Visual RStudio. And so now here's my RStudio that opened up. And now I want to look at, in the File tab, you can see the files in that folder. And here's my R Notebook. So we're going to click on that. And here is the week 2 assignment that opened up. So it's very similar to last week. Put your name in, and you can read through some of this information, talking about basically the data analysis process. And one of the first things that we're going to look at is cleaning the data before we ever do any analysis. And in the videos, which I went ahead and left the links there. They're optional. They're a little more advanced than what we need to focus on in this course, but it's nice to see what type of cleaning a thorough job of it would look like. And I've kind of pulled out some of the key points there. And you're usually going to look for some of these things. So the data accuracy, you want to make sure that your types of data are correct. At this point, you want to be getting really good at looking at a variable and the data in it, and trying to make it identify which level of measurement that is, whether it's nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. You're going to look through the data and look for any typos. You're going to look for any things that don't make sense. Do you have a 2,000-pound person? That obviously wouldn't make sense, and you're going to want to go either find the real data, maybe somebody hid an extra 0 on accident and the person really weighs 200 pounds, or really it's some sort of data entry error and you should exclude that data point from the analysis. And obviously that type of an error would have quite an influence on any results that you got, so you really want to check those before you do anything. You want to check that categories make sense. If you have gender and you have male and female, and then you have horse, obviously there's a mistake, so you want to check for that. And you want to correct any problems or exclude them from the analysis, but you need to make a decision and keep track of what you're doing, because you always want to report the process that you went through and what kind of choices you made. If you do exclude people from an analysis, you want to be able to report that and give your reasons for doing that, a justification. Sometimes on instruments, some items are oriented in the opposite direction of most of the others, and you need to reverse code them. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You should score any instruments before doing your analysis, meaning, if it's an anxiety questionnaire and there's 10 questions, you need to sum them all up, or however they score that instrument. You want to go ahead and do it at this point. And like I said, you want to keep track of those things so that you can report that when you're reporting results, because that's an important element of a statistical analysis. You're going to look for missing data. Do you have 1% missing, or do you have 10% missing? There's a big difference between that. So you want to take a look at that. You're going to look at outliers, and we'll talk, you'll see more about what those are in the readings in the text. But any data points that fall outside of normal limits. And then we're going to check statistical assumptions, and we will talk more about that later. So this assignment, we're going to look at some of the steps that we take to assess data accuracy and identify missing data. This is a markdown file like we talked about last week. And I just heard my wife come in, and so I'm going to pause this. Okay, I'm back. So this should look familiar. Whenever you're going to do something in R Studio, you need to figure out what packages you might be using. And we have a new one on this assignment, so I just added it to the list. If you have not installed, you'll probably at least have to install this new package, but the other two would probably already be installed. So we'll go ahead and run this section by clicking on the Run Current Chunk button here on the right-hand side. And I think that looked okay, but just for fun, I'm going to run it one more time, and so we can see that all three are there. I'd probably just always run that twice just to do it. And just so you guys are aware, this is something I programmed. When the actual command for installing the packages is here, this install.packages, and you will not get the same output, but I like to see a little bit of output, and so I put this command in here to print. And this library just loads it into memory if it's not already there, or it will tell you, it will give you a message to say that you don't have the package. So that's what that is when you're working in R. So now we're going to open the data file, and we'll run this chunk, and it gives us a file selection box, and we're going to pick this week 1 CSV and hit open. And we saw this last time. Whenever we open a new object, it shows up here in our variable, our environment, and I can click on that object and I can see the data in it here on our data set, and it's the same data set that we had looked at last week. Okay, we can keep going down. So we're going to look at some things in the data set. So there are some ways here to look at what's in the data set. So and you'll notice what I've done here is I've put 3 different commands for letting us look at different parts of the data set, and this is some things in R. And we'll see something else later on in a few weeks, but this is good to get to know some R commands. So the view data set, you'll notice that view is there, but the other 2 commands, I've got a comment symbol in front of it, and what that does is it comments the whole line out, and in R the hashtag indicates a comment. So I'm going to go ahead and run this block so we can see what it does, and what that view does, it's the same thing as clicking on the data set. So that's a pretty handy one because it's nice to look at it. Excuse me. And it's nice to be able to visualize your data set when you have a limited number of variables and a limited number of rows. This works pretty well. But obviously on really large data sets with, 50 or 100 variables and a lot of rows, then obviously it would be kind of tedious to look at it by a visual inspection. But when possible, I like to do a visual inspection. And you can kind of see that we don't have any missing data. When just looking at it quickly, things look pretty consistent. Again, without any metadata here and without like looking at a data dictionary, I don't really, if I had not made the data set, I wouldn't be able to say for sure what each of these variables really was. But usually you're working with data and you have some sort of a guide or a data dictionary to tell you what they are if it's not included in your variable. And you'll notice that you can click on the column headers and it will sort the data set according to that column. And you'll notice the order of these row numbers change, according to how you did this, and you can sort it ascending and descending. So it's pretty handy. It's very similar to a spreadsheet. So what we can do is we can go ahead and try out the other options, and we can just put the number sign in front of the first line and take it away from the next one, and run that, and you'll see it puts another summary of your data down here below our data block. And this is probably the first time that you're seeing one of the nice parts of an R Notebook in Visual Studio is you can have your code and your output right there on the same sheet, and this makes it really convenient. And this isn't really for a complete inspection. It's kind of help you get familiar with the data. You'll notice that we have our variable names, we have the data type that it is in R, and then you'll see you have a sample, but it does not show the complete thing there. So it's very similar to looking at it in the data set in the our tab up here, but it's not quite as complete. So I personally pretty much do this as my first choice, but I'm giving you the different commands, and don't worry about memorizing these. I'm not going to ask you to memorize a bunch of commands in this class, but I want you to at least have seen this. And this str data set is another way to see, I think it stands for the structure of the data set, and you'll see it's very similar to this. And I believe in some of the readings I've talked a little bit about tidyverse, and that is a real movement that has been going in R for a few years now of trying to have a consistent set of packages that do things in a similar way and kind of use the same underlying organization so that it is just more consistent for data science. And so this str function is older. It's been there for quite a long time in R, and so you might see that in places, and it's just a really easy way to get it basically has the same information that this other one does. It's just this other one is part of a tidyverse package, and this str data set is an older one. So I'm going to go ahead and just I'll leave that how it is. So now we're going to look at some ways to look at a little more closely at these variables. So we're going to run this down here, and so this is some tidyverse information, and you'll see there's our variable name, and there is the full name what the data type is. So these nominal and ordinal have a character data type, and interval and ratio have a numeric, and you'll notice those match with what these are, but up here in the glimpse and the string and the structure command, they give you abbreviations. So it's just a way you can see what's there. We haven't really talked too much about what a factor is, but we've talked about levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. And factors are another name in statistics for a categorical variable. So if a variable has categories, like gender would be male and female, or birth order, which we looked at last week, have first, second, third, and fourth. Those are categories, and those variables could be called a factor. And a factor just means a categorical variable that divides people into groups, or divides whatever you're looking at into groups. So our data set didn't really indicate where the factors are. So one of the things that we're going to do is change our variable types. When we import them, it doesn't really indicate in the data set that it is a factor. And some operations that we perform, it's better to have it labeled as a factor. So I've put some commands in here, and this is a tidyverse way to make a manipulation in a data set. And again, we're going to see this for a couple weeks, and I want you to just see this as part of being exposed to R, but we will not have to do a lot of manipulation here, so you do not need to memorize these commands unless you want to. And if you get into a lot of data manipulation, which we will not get into in this class because this is a statistics course, not a data manipulation course, then these commands you will see more often if you look at more of that. And so we're going to indicate the levels on a factor. So the different categories are called levels in a factor. So we're going to have factors and the levels of the factors. And we're going to create a nominal one, and we're going to create an ordinal one. And so you see there's our first factor of nominal with female and male, and we can create a factor, but in R, when you create a factor and you have text in there, it automatically puts it in alphabetical order. And so we actually have an order that we want for this variable, and you'll notice that by default it changes the order to first, fourth, second, third. That obviously is not in the correct order. It's in alphabetical order, but we want the order that we would associate with numbers: first, second, third, and fourth. And so we can recode a factor as an ordinal factor, and that's just an example of how to do that. Again, you're getting exposed to this. You've seen that it can be done, and I'm not going to make you do this on a test, or we won't even really have to do much manipulation after these first few weeks, but you need to be familiar with the fact that you might have to clean up a data set first, and this is how you do it if you're using RStudio and some tidyverse functions to do it. So we can review the variables, and we can we use our view function again, and again we're looking at it, and there really isn't anything that we need to look at with this. Oh, I forgot, you can click on the little arrow here and see these, and if you look at this now, you'll see that nominal is a factor with 2 levels, and ordinal is an ordinal factor with 4 levels. So this little window is pretty handy to be able to examine your data. So we're going to do some descriptive statistics whenever we're data cleaning. And for a categorical variable, the correct descriptive statistics are to get frequencies and percents. And that a frequency is just a count of how many is in each category. So if we were looking at our data set on the nominal, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that we'd have 5 females and 5 males, and that would give me a frequency of 5 and a percent of 50. And same for males, a frequency of 5 and a percent of 50. And so it's always a good idea when getting to know a data set to get your frequencies and percents for your categorical variables. And there is the command frequency, FREQ, out of the summary tools package, and that gave us how many males and females. And in our ordinal variable, there are our 4 categories with the frequency, and the first 2 have 30% and the last 2 have 20%. This valid cum, that stands for the cumulative percentage, so it will start at the first category, and then for the next one, and that's 30%, and then it will add in the next category. So while the next one is 30%, the cumulative percent is now 60% because it's 30 plus 30. And the next one is 20%, and so now it's 60 plus 20 is 80. And then our last one adds the last 20%. So you can see how much of the percent is involved up to that point when you use all the categories. So that is very important to remember. The correct type of descriptive statistic for categorical variables, which nominal and ordinal are categorical variables, and the correct descriptive statistic for that type of data is a frequency and percent. And we also have 2 continuous variables, interval and ratio, and we're going to get the descriptive statistic. And the correct descriptive statistic for a continuous variable is a mean and a standard deviation. Most of the time. And the caveat is if things are normally distributed, the mean and standard deviation is the best descriptive statistic. But sometimes you have really skewed data, and in that case, then the median and the range, which would be the minimum to the maximum. Those would be a good descriptive statistic. So I like to just have them all available, and that helps us to just get an idea of how that works. So when I look at this mean here, I know that the mean is around 37, and then within 7/10 of a degree up or down is 1 standard deviation. And that tells me, they're not spread really far from our mean of 37. But you'll see our ratio variable, our mean is 69, but our standard deviation is 5. So there's more of a spread on that one, and that's always a good idea to get a look at that when you're doing data cleaning and when you're getting familiar with a new data set. So after showing you these specific commands, this package df summary has a nice, the summary tools package has this df summary variable. Okay, I think when we knit our package, we'll see that. So sometimes it will show in a viewer window, and I think I have this set up so that it will show up in our knitter when we knit the document, but we'll see that in a second. And then we're not going to do a lot of plotting in this class with ggplot, but ggplot2 is a very commonly used function in R and RStudio, and so I have this here to let us see some basic plots using ggplot. So here's our nominal variable, and here's a bar plot. And for categorical variables, a bar plot is probably the best thing to use. It's very simple to interpret, and sometimes pie charts can be a little hard to judge the distance because it's round, and I personally prefer to use bar plots for categorical variables. There's a bar plot for our other categorical variable. And for continuous variables, box plots and histograms are the best way to go. So there's a box plot for our interval variable, and there is a histogram for our other variable, and we don't have very many data points, so these are kind of spread apart. Doesn't look like a typical histogram, but it would with a more normal data set. And you can also do, if you're interested in seeing the relationship of two variables, you can do a scatter plot. And this is a scatter plot of the interval and the ratio variables, and you can see the points fall around there. There is another plot, and you'll see that when we use ggplot, there's a few things to set in there. We're not going to use this extensively this semester, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it. You can read on your own if you want to. It's a really powerful package, and you can do. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options, and you can make some very interesting plots. But for what we're doing right now, we don't need to do that. We just need the basics. But there is another simpler function in ggplot called qplot, stands for quick plot, and you'll see that it works. That same command works with all of these variables, a qplot, and if I have one at a time or the other one, and we can see what it gave us. There's a quick bar plot of our it kind of intuits what kind of variable it is, and since we labeled these as factors, it knows these have groups, and so it did bar plots for nominal and ordinal. There's a bar plot for our interval and our ratio, and when we had two variables in the command, it gave us a scatter plot. And since those are so well-defined variables, there's only two there, male and female, and ratio, it has them divided into two lines basically. So those are some basics of how to do some data cleaning, or at least examining in RStudio using some summarized functions and looking at data with ggplot2, and that's an important part of cleaning your data. And obviously, as you can tell from the videos that I linked, there's a lot you can talk about with this. We're not going to go into a huge amount of other detail. So let's go ahead and try to knit this. Okay. And Okay. So this has a this is my other laptop where I had already installed this, and the settings on this Visual Studio are slightly different, but it did create my HTML file in my folder where I was keeping my assignment, and I just went and clicked it and opened it up. So it was there. So you can see that we have our assignment formatted. It looks a little prettier than it did just as our notebook. And you can see that this df summary command gave us a nice quick summary of each of our variables. And I really like this df summary because it kind of puts all of the descriptives and some graphs right at your fingertips. It's really easy to look over a large data set quickly to get familiar with it. You see we got frequencies, and we have some means and standard deviations, and this is a nice one when you're trying to get just a summary of a data set. And you'll see our different plots came out here, and of course you're going to fill in this feedback and then submit this. So this HTML file that came up in my assignment, you'll see week 2 assignment NB HTML. I'll just submit that. So anyway, I hope this helps with this assignment, and I will see you guys in office hours, and I hope you have a good week.